Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses as we continue with Part 11, the oldest inhabited city of the world, of a long civilization's trail, an account of recent experiences in mystic places and strange lands by Ralph M. Lewis, KRC, an article taken from Rosicrucian Digest, Volume 16, Number 1, February 1938. A Long Civilization's Trail by Ralph M. Lewis, KRC. Editor's note. This is the 11th episode of a narrative by the Supreme Secretary relating the experiences he and his party had in visiting mystic shrines and places in Europe and the ancient world. The oldest inhabited city of the world. France, we learned, was anxious to make Syria profitable to her, to develop it in some way so that it would not become an enormous expense or burden to the homeland, as it very evidently now was. She could not, however, gain the confidence and respect of the people of Syria, primarily because of her foreign policies and her refusal to oblige her officials, both military and diplomatic, who were stationed there, to learn the native language. It is related that she considers it beneath French dignity and obliges the natives to learn French if they wish to transact any business or affairs with her. This attitude caused a resentment which could not be bridged over by any protestations of friendliness. On the other hand, two other interests were seeking control in Syria. Turkey, who during the Ottoman Empire reigned supreme in Syria, as almost everywhere else in the Levant, had her agents constantly fomenting discord and dissatisfaction among the people, agitating against France and urging an overthrow of the French mandate and the return of Syria to Turkish rule. The more intelligent of the Syrians oppose this move. They either recall experiences with Turkey in the past or are very familiar with the history of Syria under Turkish domination, and they desire Syrian independence, a complete nationalistic government. One of the two candidates for presidency was definitely a tool of the French government and would have been in accord with any move France wished to make. The other candidate was said to be a tool of the Nationalist Party that sought complete independence from France. The Nationalist Party dared not run one of its own principal supporters, for France would have definitely prevented the election. The tool of the Nationalist Party had to appear to be sympathetic toward France, but as we later learned, was really powerless to speak and act without consulting his supporters. The president-elect of Syria resided at our hotel, and by a coincidence his quarters were directly across from ours. He was a small man, one who appeared to be more impressed with his own importance than with the welfare of the state. He was an enthusiastic motion picture fan, particularly upon those occasions when the only theater of the city exhibited newsreels in which he appeared. The local cinema was in the same block and only about 2 doors from the main entrance of the hotel. Yet upon his frequent weekly visits to it, a car of state would pull up to the main entrance of the hotel. The president's uniformed military guard of 6 would stand at attention and present arms, while he entered the car and was driven about 400 feet further down the block. Then the car would stop, the military guard would march up to it, stand at attention, and again present arms while he left the car. At the end of the performance, the whole ceremony was repeated. It was like a scene from a comic opera. It seems as though the citizenry knew the status of the situation, and more respect and awe were shown for the Bedouin chieftain, the principal political supporter of the National Party, the power behind the scenes, who used the hotel lobby and foyer for his consultations. This political leader and hero of the National Party, who is said to pull the strings that actuate the president, is a very intellectual type, eyes far apart, deep-set, visionary, dreamy. Dressed in Western attire, he never made dramatic entrances, nor was he ostentatious in his mannerisms. He had been incarcerated a number of times by the French authorities for inconsequential offenses, mainly, of course, for political reasons. He was the author of a number of books having considerable circulation in Syria and elsewhere, written mainly to reveal the purported oppression of Syria. One often reads of these political fracases and intrigues, but one very seldom has the opportunity to see them demonstrated and enacted in such intimate quarters as the lobby of a hotel, and so openly disclosed. Syria, politically, has not yet acquired the subtleties or diplomacies of her larger sister nations of the world, where the same things occur, but are rather more carefully staged. Our next day was spent mainly in making preliminary preparations for Mr. Brower's and my departure for the strange land of Babylonia, known as Iraq or Mesopotamia. The following day was devoted to photographing some of the historic sites of this most historic city of Damascus with our Graflex still camera. We visited the street called Straight, a very long and actually very straight street, which bisects the city from the eastern to the western gate, a street which had been in existence for several centuries. The major portion of this street is covered over with an arched ceiling forming an arcade in which there are occasional skylights permitting a soft light which penetrates the dust and smoke fumes from the bazaars and shops below. On either side of the narrow street are little shops, most of them mere closets or cubbyholes, niches in the wall over the entrances of which are suspended striped awnings of vivid hue. The proprietors are frequently in native costume. They sit on their haunches before their shops, with knees up under the chin, the most uncomfortable posture for a Westerner or one unaccustomed to it. Or they sit upon small stools, the seats of which are of woven fiber or, like the stools of antiquity, of strips of leather. As you pass, they pull at your garments or run in front of you trying to block your way in as gracious a manner as they possibly can, endeavoring to have you turn and enter their shops. If they think you are English or American, or if they understand any English whatsoever, they cry "best goods," meaning that their particular bazaar or shop contains the best wares of its kind. The best goods cry, of course, is not to be relied upon, for 4 or 5 doors further on another one of these shops with equal service and wares can be found. The city of Damascus has long been noted for its steel. A particular process was used by the early Damascans in making steel, which caused it to be renowned among the ancients. Excellent cutlery, knives, swords, and dirks, marvelous examples of craftsmanship, may be purchased at ridiculously small prices if one is accustomed to buying in these bazaars, which means not purchasing at the first price demanded. The Syrians are also noted for their native candy, which has a remarkable combination of flavors and is very attractively prepared. If one can overlook the methods of making it and uncleanliness is not too repulsive to him, the candy is very enjoyable. A number of the bazaars specialized in the sale of rugs, hand-woven and having beautiful hues and a variety of design which would delight any lover of Oriental rugs. Although the prices were considerably less than any we had seen previously, these rugs were yet much higher in price than those which we were to see later on. In the center of the city is a great mosque, originally a Christian church built by Constantine. Around the mosque are the original walls built by the crusaders. They are still in an excellent state of preservation. One enters the great arched gateway, and there before him is an enormous plaza of original flagging. The high wall surrounding it has, on each of its 4 corners, a minaret tower from which the muezzin, a nomad priest, calls the faithful to prayer several times daily with his musical chant. The area within the walls would comprise the equivalent of at least 3 or 4 of our modern city blocks or squares. In this area are also 2 or 3 small buildings, some partly in ruins, which are now shrines because of some historical significance. The great mosque itself is to the left of the court and runs the full length of it. There are several entrances typical of Byzantine architecture. We were amazed upon entering to find an enormous room without partitions and supported by Byzantine columns or spiral columns, graceful, tall and impressive. These columns supported timbers upon which the flat stone roof rested. The entire area of this great space, which must have been at least 300 feet in length and about 100 feet in width, was covered by rare oriental rugs. Not only rare because of excellent material and design, but because they were several centuries old. One of them was the largest single woven rug I have ever seen. It did not consist of several sewn together. It was one continuous weaving and was nearly 200 feet in length and the complete width of the structure. Although showing considerable wear, it was still in an excellent condition. By a rubbing of the hand over the surface of the rug and brushing the nap back, in a few moments, the original colors would return with brilliance. We were informed that a wealthy English nobleman some 50 years ago, had offered the Mohammedans of Damascus £10,000, or about $50,000 for this rug, and the Mohammedans were quite offended, because no price would be accepted for such a rug, having been so long in such a sacred place. Toward one end of this great room were 4 wooden shafts, like posts, reaching to the roof from the stone floor. Around these shafts, which were set about 8 feet apart, forming an 8-foot square, was an Arabian grillwork of wood, through which one could look. The floor of the center was a mosaic. The colors were a delicate pastel shade, and the design consisted of flowers, vines, and clusters of grapes. On the center of this mosaic floor sat a small gold chest, about 2 feet in length, 1 foot wide, and about 18 inches high, apparently of hand-beaten gold. Our curiosity was naturally aroused by the special prominence given this chest, and we engaged one of the Moslems in conversation. Speaking fair English, he advised us that the chest was supposed to contain the head of St. John the Baptist, and beneath the mosaic floor was the tomb of St. John the Baptist. It may seem strange to many Christians to know that St. John the Baptist, as an individual, is venerated by these Muslims as well as by the Christians. Not because he was a Christian, but because he was a holy man to them, and because his deeds and the accomplishments of his life were highly respected by the Mohammedans. No one has ever opened this chest, according to historians, to determine whether or not it does contain a skull, which might be in some way identified with St. John the Baptist. Whether or not St. John the Baptist's remains are beneath the mosaic floor, no one knows. But history does recount the legend that St. John the Baptist was entombed there. Our journey carried us through a number of little winding cobblestone streets, all filled with small bazaars and shops, and containing a jostling crowd of jabbering citizens who turned to stare at us. Foreigners, particularly Europeans and Americans, do not frequent Damascus since it is far off the popular tourist track. Those few who do come do not go into the native quarters as we were doing. We finally stopped before a large wall, more rightly the side of a building. It was covered with a white stucco, badly soiled, and which had broken away in part, exposing mud brick behind it, with an occasional natural stone protruding. We walked to the entranceway, which consisted of 2 large wooden doors, planks hung on crude hinges, suggesting no evidence of the beauty and quaint interior we were to see. When the doors were opened, we unconsciously gave vent to words and phrases that indicated our pleasure at what we saw. Before us was one of the most attractive gardens I've ever had the pleasure of viewing. It was not as elaborate or as expansive as many of the spacious lawns and gardens which we find in America or England. In fact, it was rather small, but it was as though we were looking at an old Persian print, or as though there had materialized before us a scene out of the Arabian Nights. Here was a true Persian garden, such as fabled in song and story. In the center was a mosaic pool. The artistic design consisted of Arabic characters and geometrical symbols. The center of the pool had a bubbling fountain. In its center were lotus and water lilies and water plants with which we were not familiar. The flagging, which was uneven in the courtyard, was of a variety of stones of beautiful natural colors, some a light shade of blue, some terracotta, some slate, some almost as black and shiny as onyx. About the flagging were large vases, terracotta, evidently handmade because they were not of uniform shape or size and did not sit level on the flooring. Some of them showed indentations, traces of the potter's fingerprints, and in these vases there were growing shrubs and flowers of brilliant hues and vines which climbed the walls and high windows. Toward one end of this patio, or more properly Persian garden, and of which we were to see many in the near future, was an arched walk. Stepping up onto the walk and walking its extreme length, we entered another doorway into a very small but high chamber, which housed a huge sarcophagus which was quite plain, without color or design. In fact, the tomb chamber itself was without any ornamentation, without any splendor of any sort, and yet it contained the remains of one of the most famous characters in history and the most beloved by the Mohammedans. It was the tomb of Saladin, who lived between 1138 and 1193 AD, and who died in this city of Damascus. He was a great military lord and defender of the Moslem faith, and renowned for his opposition to the crusaders. Although fierce in warfare, in actual combat, he was noted not only for his bravery, but for his kindness to prisoners, to the men, women, and children whom he captured, and for his high idealism. His word was his bond, and he countenanced no lies or treachery. He despised the breaking of promises, which was common among many of the Crusader leaders, who would resort to any means to accomplish their end in the name of Christianity. Our party was to be further divided in Damascus. Frater and Soro Shibli had remained in Jerusalem. Frater Brower and I were to take our elaborate cinema camera equipment and photographic apparatus and paraphernalia with us further east on our venture across the Mesopotamian desert. Soro Gladys Lewis was to remain in Damascus, awaiting our return some 10 days later. Damascus was hardly the place to leave an unescorted American or European woman. Even native Syrian women were infrequently seen out of doors or in public places except when escorted by their husbands or some male member of their immediate families. On such occasions they were veiled. American and European women are accustomed to greater freedom and dislike being confined, and yet it would be obviously dangerous to go about these bazaars and native district and even the main thoroughfares without an escort. Soro Lewis, however, insisted that we proceed as scheduled, so we prepared for our departure, and one of the most exciting adventures we were to experience on our entire journey. We retired early that night as we were to leave at sunrise the next morning. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.